Peace, love, knowledge, and freedom, and welcome to another episode of the Just Sing podcast. Today, I'm going to be covering knowledge of self. I'm not gonna say a cliche topic, but it's a topic that has been, thrown out there, talked about for quite some time now, for a long time, but it's becoming more popularized, I guess, in more recent times, and it's there are a few misconceptions about knowledge of self. Then there's also a few limitations to knowledge of self as to how we're, moving with it and understanding it in today's, in today's rhetoric, so to speak. When it comes to knowledge of self, knowledge of self is a deep concept because, to know yourself to know yourself is like the first point of internal liberation, which then can liberate your external circumstances and where you stand on the outside, as far as your abilities to create things, manifestations, and different things of that nature. Knowledge of self is one of the, I don't know, I'm not gonna say a cornerstone, but it's a very quintessential piece, an important piece of the self that I feel. So I wanted to just, take some time to go over a little bit of my own personal, experience, personal perspective as to what knowledge of self is, the depths of it. And as I said, some of the limitations that have been imposed, because a lot of it is just, it's gotten so commercialized, it's so cliche that people get a little glimpse of it, but we're never really tapping into the true essence of ourselves because, we speak all the time about, knowledge is power and this, that, and the third. But then when it comes to knowledge of self, how is it that in some regards we're not really that powerful? Because a lot of the times that knowledge is limited, that knowledge is tainted, that knowledge is coerced in order to make your power be of detriment to you. So I kind of, like I said, I kind of just wanted to go over that in that regard. So we'll be touching up on, very, very, very specific topics and specific points of view, So before I go into it, because if I, start rambling now, it's gonna take away from the meat and potatoes, as people would call it. So as always, be sure to follow me on all my social media, accounts. Be sure to get my book, So Frail, The Reality of Black Male Masculinity, So Frail 2, Toxic Femininity, and Hitting It Raw, Living the Raw Plant-Based Lifestyle. As I say, follow my merchandise page. You can follow me if you're trying to get into the plant-based lifestyle at the Hitting It Raw program. You can get the book, Hitting It Raw, Living the Raw Plant-Based Lifestyle for Life, wherever ebooks are sold, and any other links, connections that you have to get for me, to me, are in the description of the podcast. So without further ado, we're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to come right back and we're going to dive into knowledge of self. Oh yeah, and don't forget to visit IamJustSeen.com. There you can get all things Just Seen. You want to add the So Frail series to your library? Visit IamJustSeen.com. You want to learn how to master the market for serious trading and investing? Visit IamJustSeen.com. You want to get your hands on some exclusive merch like tees, hoodies, coffee mugs, hats, bags? Visit IamJustSeen.com. Are you thinking about transitioning into the plant-based lifestyle? Visit IamJustSeen.com. You ever want to just chat with Seen about anything from simple advice to mentorship? Visit IamJustSeen.com. Anything and everything that is me, you can find at IamJustSeen.com. So just take a quick peek into my world and see why being just seen is nothing less but always more. Because you never really know what you need until you see it. You will never see it unless you visit IamJustSeen.com. Welcome back. Hope everybody's in good vibes, high spirits. Whatever space you may be, hopefully, you're in a good space. Today's a beautiful day. Live, laugh, learn. Everything should be everything. So going into, knowledge of self. Knowledge of self is, first off, before we go into knowledge of self, we need to, look at knowledge. You feel me? We need to look at knowledge. And in addition to looking at knowledge, we have to understand the the cornerstones of it all. Knowledge in its core is basically like information. It's the facts, opinions, thoughts. It's all of the different things that accumulate to help you, I guess, make a decision in life, help you see um, certain perspectives, certain points of views in life. Knowledge is that point. It's the act of knowing that pretty much pushes culture forward. It's the act of knowing that pushes ourselves forward. It's the act of knowing that elevates us on on a regular plane. So when it comes to knowledge, and obtaining it, you shouldn't be. I'm not gonna say you shouldn't be, because I don't want to seem like I'm dictating people's lives and shit. But it's it's important to be able to embrace and accept different forms of knowledge, different schools of thought with an unbiased mind. Anyone who who has a fear, or who refuses to understand or to learn about different cultures, different societies, different bits of information, they are viewing themselves through a specific lens, and they are only operating from, for lack of a better term, an ignorant perspective. And by ignorant, I simply mean the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding, the lack of accumulated information based off a topic that makes you ignorant to it. So when it comes to knowledge of self, basically this is the refusal to be ignorant to yourself, to your own energy, to your own essence, to your own creation. And the purpose of speaking on this topic is because I witness a lot of people, when they're talking about knowledge of self, they mainly focus on history. You feel me? They mainly focus on history. They focus on what was, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine, because to know where you're headed, you got to know where you've been. I use the metaphor of a bow and arrow all the time. The farther you can pull a bow and arrow back, the bow on the arrow back, the further it can go. You feel what I'm saying? So I'm always big on, knowing that. But there's still two other points to that, because you still have the present and you still have the future. So you have what was, what is, and what will be, And if we stay within the realm of what was, we can't create what will be. If we stay in the realm of what was as we fear what is, we cannot dictate or pose any mandates within what will be. So when it comes to knowledge of self, we have to truly embrace that about ourselves. You feel what I'm saying? And it's not just about the history all the time. You accumulate the history to understand your present, to create your future, to determine what your future is going to be. So in that, when it comes to knowledge, we have to understand two important points. And these points are thought and recollection. A lot of times we blur the lines and we confuse the two, because we think that thinking is remembering. Well, I don't think that we think that, but we have been conditioned to internalize thinking as remembering, or vice versa. And because of that, that limits our capacity to move forward. So when you're conditioned to believe that remembering is thinking, it makes it hard to think analytically. It makes it hard to think critically, because everything has to be based off of a template. Everything has to be based off of recollection. It has to be based off of a database or a prior bit of information that you currently have, or that you have to obtain. And that's why knowledge of self can be limiting, because if your knowledge of self is not based off of the other 2 points of what is and what will be, then you're always going to focus on what was. And by focusing on what was, it keeps you in the past. It keeps you haunted by certain things. It keeps you in that realm. And depending on what past you're stuck on, depending on what past you're focused on, that's going to dictate which way you go. You feel what I'm saying? And a perfect example of that is considering knowledge of self. When we look at history, when we look at our history specifically, there's 2 quintessential points that can pretty much dictate what our futures are going to be. If we are operating from the knowledge of self point of, and this is why I try so hard not to use this, and I respect this level of ancestry, but I don't embody it and I don't internalize it as my source of ancestry, because when we internalize, we came from slaves. Everything that we do is an accomplishment. There's nothing to strive for. You feel me? We create a mentality that there's nothing to strive for. And rather than thinking about it, we have recollection behind it, and we're remembering, and we're stuck in that. And that keeps that loop in our mind. And that makes things appear to be progressive. You feel what I'm saying? It appears to be progressive. And when we say, we came from slaves, or our ancestors were slaves, and then you understand what slavery was, when you understand the depths and the capacity of what slavery actually did to our people, then when you look at your current circumstance, it's more of a, just for lack of better terms, like at least I'm not a slave. You feel me? Because the slaves, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't, learn languages, they couldn't do anything else to expand their mind. You feel what I'm saying? So when we put that as our template and we put that as our starting point for our knowledge of self, what's going to happen is when we graduate from high school, we're going to feel like that's progress. When we graduate, like it's like we look at it's little small things and subtle things that just because we achieved it and we think, okay, I came from slaves, this is a giant step for me. I've come so much farther than them, but in that aspect of knowledge of self, that's gonna put a cap on you. That'll never let you unlock your truest potential, because literally everything is an accomplishment. You feel me? Everything's an accomplishment or a stalemate. You're either gonna grow or you're gonna stagnate. But it's like, what is the level of growth? Just enough. You feel me? And that's what that aspect of the recollection is. But then you have, on the other hand, where you go beyond the boats, you go beyond the ships, you go beyond the harbors, and you realize, okay, we had culture, we had lucrative dynasties, we had, sciences, we taught people, we taught, the world, So then when you start to go to that aspect, this is why it's important not to stay there, stay in the recollection phase, and have to understand the separation between thought. Because now when you go back to those points, now when it's cliche, we say it all the time, we came from kings and queens. First, let's keep it 100. Everybody didn't come from kings and queens. Everybody that, like, there wasn't like everybody's family didn't have a dynasty. Everybody's family didn't have a kingdom. Some people lived within a kingdom. Some people were, peasants. Some people were, and not peasants in a disrespectful way, as if beneath people, but I mean just the commoners of the land. And you have the kings, you have the viziers, you have the priests, you have the oracles, you have all of these different people serving their role. So everybody didn't come from kings and queens. But by that same standard, if that's what we're going to embrace as the knowledge of ourselves, we need to start doing regal shit. We need to do regal shit. We need to act regally. And then we need to tap into what they did that made them the kings and queens. We need to tap into those aspects. You feel what I'm saying? And that's a part of the knowledge of self. But when we take it back there, like I said, beyond the ships, beyond the shackles, beyond the chains, and we go to the dynasties, we go to the thought process of the world, then we realize, now we have a level of accountability. That just the accomplishments that you achieve coming out of slavery pale in comparison to the accomplishments that you are supposed to achieve knowing that you came from a dynasty, knowing that you came from kings and queens, knowing that you came from geniuses of the world. Because now what taps into that knowledge of self is accountability and responsibility, because now you have to move forward to that. So again, this is not a shot. I want you to hear me objectively. And this is not a shot towards the ancestors who were enslaved and the ones who, preceded them and things of that nature. But when you put it in regular context, you now have to see that where we could be considered a genius in the eyes of those who were once enslaved, we're actually mentally retarded to the ones who ruled years ago, who ruled dynasties millennia ago. Like, that's the comparison. So I get how it's easy and it's more comfortable. I don't know if this is a subconscious or unconscious thing to do, but it becomes a level of comfort. You know what I'm saying? When we're like, oh, I came from a slave, so now I can read. Now I can write, like just basics. You feel what I'm saying? But to know that, man, I came from people who are multi-geniuses, people who built pyramids, people who did all of these things. Damn, I came from them, you know? And coming from them, that means I have a lot more work to do. Now, granted, if you internalize it negatively, you will see it as a burden. You will see it as extra work. You will get anxiety. You will get all these different things because you're like, damn, now I have a mission. Like I have to work this hard. But then it's like, if you see it from a positive perspective, it excites you. It's like, yo, this is where I came from. Wow. That's some amazing shit. You feel me? But you can't stay stuck in the history. You feel me? You can't stay stuck in the history of what was. Because even still, there was a downfall. Even still, something happened. You know, that's a whole different conversation in its own. But I'm speaking in terms of, you know, staying there. Okay, we understand that we came from kings and queens. We understand that we have this regality. We understand that we had the viziers and the priests and all of that. We understand these aspects. So now what do we do with it? You feel me? And that's when knowledge becomes power, because knowledge isn't power. Knowledge is potential. The application of knowledge is power, because you have to turn potential energy into kinetic energy. You feel me? The energy that is just stagnated, it has to move. It has to transform in order to be a reality. You feel me? That's when it becomes powerful. You feel me? That's when it becomes powerful. So when it comes to that, we have to change our thought process. You feel me? And learn how to think in the present and think for going forward into the future, as opposed to just always recollecting. You know, always having the recollection of what we did. Because what are we doing now? What are we? You feel me? It has to be a differentiation between, you know, what we were and what we are, because it's two totally different dynamics. You feel what I'm saying? There was other things that played into that. So now, outside of the kings and queens things, whether, you know, you stick with the religious context, and this is kind of why I have my views towards religion, but it's like most religious contexts still support slavery. They still support the notion that, you know, you came from a slave, or you're born into sin. You know, you're born into certain negative conditions. So it doesn't give you that incentive to get out. You feel me? It gives you that incentive to just do enough. Because once you've done enough, you've completely eclipsed what was, you know. So maybe I don't sin, or whatever the sin may be, or maybe I can be born again, or whatever that situation is. You feel me? But what does it start with? What does your knowledge of self start with? Do you start off as a slave? Do you start off coming from a people who couldn't listen? Do you start off from a people who were always viewed, who always attacked, and always shipped off into different forms of captivity because that plays a part into what you allow your real life to be? You know, when you get punished, when you go through when you go through certain trials in life, and these trials are difficult, as opposed to fighting through to get through them, you'll say, well, hey, it's just supposed to happen this way because this is what I am. I must have done something wrong for this to occur. So that level of knowledge of self taps into it. You feel what I'm saying? But that's from the perspective of the past. You feel me? Just the past. So now, when we look at the present and the future, this is when your knowledge of self really has to change. And it has to broaden, because we can't limit ourselves to the knowledge of self of just history. You know, we still have to understand the sciences. We still have to understand the art forms. We need to understand so many different things that are incorporated within knowledge of self to know what we really are. You feel what I'm saying? So it's like I hear a lot of times, you know, when in regards to the knowledge of self, like I said, it comes to the history. But what about the scientific aspect of knowledge of self? What about the melanin that our skin possesses? What about our genetic template? What about different things of that nature, the way we were supposed to eat? Like, so we can go back to the kings and queens, you know, but then to go back to them, we have to understand what made them regal, what made them that divinity that we brag about, that we glorify, you know, that we truly honor every day. You know, we have to understand that. And that's when thought comes in. That's when it goes from recollection to thought, because now you have to put things into the present moment. You feel what I'm saying? So if I understand, okay, bam, I came from a king or queen. You feel me? What did they do? How did they think? What did they learn? What was their eating habits? What were their studies like? What was all of this in place? Like, it was, and that becomes a challenging part. That becomes a challenging part in the knowledge of self, because if you of all your life you believed one particular way, just deciding to change it because you accumulated the knowledge doesn't mean anything, because now you have to apply it. You feel me? Because, when it comes to the mind, when it comes to thought, there's three forms. You have the knowledge, the wisdom, and the understanding. Knowledge applied becomes wisdom. Wisdom applied becomes understanding. So in that same regard, when it comes to the knowledge of self, you have to know yourself. Then you have to have the wisdom of yourself. And then you have to have the understanding of yourself, and the knowledge is basically accumulating the information and then daily applying that shit. So if we're going to stay in going back to understand the ancestors, understand the cultures, understand the different systems, spiritual systems, whatever it is, we can't. And that's another thing. We limit it to that. In addition to limiting it to history, we limit it only to spirituality and spiritual systems because we're searching for something. Our souls are not appeased. They're not happy. We're searching for something. And we're searching so much because we know that what we're actually involved in is not right. It is not right. Now, this is, not a knock at anybody's, spiritual system, spiritual belief, because each system is supposed to be designed to take you to that next level. It's supposed to teach you everything about yourself in order to unlock it, not the things of something else that you are supposed to internalize. You feel what I'm saying? So it's like, according to spiritual systems as a whole, whether they are viewed as religions or not, a spiritual system has 3 points to it, in which you have the mythology, you have the ritual, and then you have the allegory. You feel what I'm saying? And each one of these tiers is supposed to bring you deeper into yourself. So when our spiritual system, which governs our soul, which helps our willpower, when it has been viewed a certain way, and then our knowledge of self is viewed through that lens, we have to operate within the confines of that. You feel what I'm saying? So there's certain ways you can and can't move according to these constructs. But then when you know yourself, you know which construct fits you the best, which construct you're actually supposed to be in. You should to know yourself. To know yourself is to know how you should move according to these things, not to allow these things to dictate how you move. You feel what I'm saying? And this is not just from a spiritual perspective of from the religious aspect, but this also goes into things like astrology, numerology, tarot. These things, the knowledge of self has to precede the spiritual system. The knowledge of self has to precede what you're involving yourself in, so you know how to maneuver in it, and it's not maneuvering you. It's not maneuvering you. I'll stick to the aspect of astrology and say tarot, because a lot of people, they study these things. I'm going to read my horoscope or whatnot. They'll read their horoscope. Horoscopes are typically general. You feel me? But they'll read their horoscope and they'll say, wow, today is going to really be like that. The moment they read that, they've internalized that, and their day manifests that way because they have internalized that. Not because their day was going to be that way anyway, but because this now has to manipulate them. And they're now saying, this is me because this told me that this is me. Not because I already knew what was going to happen and this confirmed it. There's a difference between a confirmation of something and a dictate of something. You feel me? And we have, when lacking the knowledge of self, a lot of things will dictate what you do, as opposed to confirm what you already knew you were about to do. You feel what I'm saying? So from that dynamic and that perspective, we have to learn deeper aspects of ourselves. We have to learn who the fuck we really are, not who someone's told us to be, not who we become conditioned to be. And a lot of times that's because the indoctrination and the conditioning starts at such an early age. Over time, we think, this is who I really am, as opposed to not who I'm created to be. I talked to a lot of people during, going through what's called spiritual awakenings and spiritual transformations. And they always say the same shit to me every single time. I've even said the shit. They say, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And if you're not in a position with the knowledge of self to understand this, yes, you are losing your mind. You will be losing your mind, and you will literally be going crazy. But here's the thing about it. That's not what's happening. You're losing the mind that was imposed upon you, and who you truly are is resurfacing. And because you never had a chance to experience who you are, you never had a chance to tap into that energy, into that essence, you feel like you're going crazy because it's completely deviating from everything you once knew, everything you stood for, everything you once stood on. It's completely changing your reality. So as I always tell people, yeah, you are going crazy, because to be crazy means that you're deviating from the norm, but you're not going insane. That's a very distinct differentiation, because you're not going insane, which means you're not losing your mind. You're losing the mind that was given to you. But that's what happens when you're actually tapping into that area of knowledge of self. Like I said, not just from the historical perspective, I mean from the true aspect of knowledge of self, which is going in to understand the core of who you are, the core of what makes you tick. All these other outside forces are supposed to help you, see these aspects of yourself, not dictate what aspects, you should internalize. Because a lot of times we internalize shit that's not even us. You feel what I'm saying? Let's look at it from just a carnal, a basic aspect. There's people that were never raised they were raised in good homes, affluent neighborhoods and everything, but they decide that they want to become a gangster. That's not your life. That's not your life. But because it looks cool, but because certain things are defined, it becomes a mandate, and it begins to dictate their life. But that comes from the ignorance of self. That comes from not knowing yourself, because you're like, okay, I could fit it. No, you can't. Everybody ain't built for that shit. Everybody ain't built for that shit. And there's a lot of people, we're living lives and we're doing things that we're not really built for. You feel what I'm saying? So back to what I was saying about, the three forms, the knowledge, wisdom, and the understanding. When you start to truly know yourself, then you have no choice but to apply it every day. But it's hard because so many societal structures make us operate a certain way. For example, when I consider the podcast, when I consider my podcast, when I consider everything that I do, a lot of people, they hit me with that wasn't professional. That wasn't professional. So I asked them, so what is professional? They always give a description, but they can never give a definition. And those two things are very, very important, because a definition is more masculine. A description is more feminine. And a description is subjective. Definition is objective. There's no change in that. So when I ask, okay, what is professionalism? They give off descriptions. Well, speaking a certain way, not using profanity, not cussing, not doing or appealing to. And the thing is, what it really gets down to is appealing and appeasement to a societal structure. You feel me? Okay, in that regard, maybe I'm not professional. But when you actually define professional, it is somebody who was who is well skilled in what they do. You're well skilled. A professional basketball player, is well skilled in what they do. A professional football player is well skilled in what they do. You're so skilled that you become the elite of what you do. You feel what I'm saying? So in that regard, yes, I will consider myself professional, because in everything that I do, I put in the effort, I put in the attention, I put in the time, I put in the dedication, I put in the discipline to make sure that I am at the top-notch level of that. So when I present it, it doesn't matter how the message is presented. You feel me? Is the actual message being delivered? Is the message getting across? And that comes, and the comfortability comes from that, because if you don't have that knowledge of self, when you're in this position, like, people's words can dictate what you're doing. You feel what I'm saying? And that can completely begin to shape your reality. So what I'm saying is that when you know yourself and you know how, you start to obtain these aspects of yourself. Well, I do this. Well, my energy is like this, or I operate from this perspective. Then you can apply yourself. It's something that we always, were told in schools, growing up. I know I've heard it several times over, apply yourself, apply yourself. But you have to have knowledge to apply yourself. You have to have knowledge to apply. You have to have something to apply yourself. So, that's where the wisdom comes in. Applied knowledge is wisdom. Knowledge is power. Therefore, wisdom is power too. And that's another system too. If you read So Frail 2, Toxic Femininity, I talk about power and strength, the difference between the two. So in the same regard, then it now kind of segues into it and goes into that dynamic a little bit more. You're not, if knowledge is power, then wisdom is strength. You know, wisdom is strength. And to apply wisdom, to apply strength is where you become invincible. Now, I'm not saying in the sense of invincibility is and you could take a motherfucking bullet, your flesh won't rip. No, hell no. I'm not on that type time. There's a level of knowledge seekers. There's a level of those preaching and, promoting knowledge of self who are creating illusions in many regards, telling people that, your body can do this, your body can do it. Yes, it may be able to, but your body is still flesh. Like certain shit has to stop. But then that aspect is like, I don't want you to assume that when I say invincibility, I mean that like you'll live forever, And in addition to that, this is another segue, but knowledge of self is not like you reach a certain level of transcendence where you are now some kind of androgynous being who's just detached completely from the world and above all of this shit. No. When you start to really achieve knowledge of self, when you get the wisdom of self, then when you get the understanding of self, this is how you're able to maneuver in life how you want to. You feel me? And if you're not wanted somewhere, you don't have to fight to be there. You just don't go. If you're not comfortable in a certain position, you just remove yourself from it. You don't try to adjust and try to make yourself fit. There's a metaphor that, that is used. I think it fits perfectly in regards to the ignorance of self versus the knowledge of self. I'm not going to say ignorance, the wisdom of self versus the knowledge of self, because having the knowledge, right, can still fuck you up in the long run if you don't know how to have the wisdom to apply it. The example that I'm going to use is the frog. There's you could put a frog in boiling water, and the frog has the ability to adjust its body temperature. It can use its internal energy to adjust itself so that way it does not get boiled. It can adjust the temperature. It can regulate its own temperature to that. However, it gets to a point where that water can get so hot, even though the temperature has adjusted for the frog and the frog is living in it. Like the water is boiling, but it's not really killing it. The frog doesn't have the energy to jump out of the water. So it's going to die anyway over time. You feel what I'm saying? And I think that's like the perfect example for the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, how I was saying the power, strength, and invincibility. That frog at that particular point is invincible, but it can't move. It doesn't even have, but in that invincibility, it doesn't have the power anymore. It no longer has the potential and the propensity to hop out of the water that's killing it. You feel what I'm saying? So when it comes to knowledge of self, don't be the frog. Don't be I know that I can adjust my temperature into this water. You feel me? I know I can do that, because I know myself, and I've applied that. And then in the application, you got the strength, and the strength outlasts, but the invincibility dies because the understanding is I'm not going to be able to jump out of this water. That frog lacked that understanding. It lacked the understanding to say, you know what? I don't have the energy. I don't have the power anymore to jump out of this water. So now I'm going to boil to death, because now at this point, I can no longer regulate my temperature. I've reached the cap. I can't do it anymore. All right. Look. The markets are not a difficult place to understand. All right. You just have to know what you're looking at. And there's 5 things that you need to see before you can make any market entry. First, you need a pocket, so you can know which direction the market is going in. Second, you need a pullback, so you can get the better price. Third, you need a battlefield, so you can see when that market movement is slowing down. Fourth, you need the upper hand, so you can see when the market reactivates. And last, you need a final push, so you can see the exact moment when it's time to go with the direction you are already moving in. Okay? Of course, there's so much more that has to go into that, and it's not as cut and dry as that. But those are things that I teach in my Mastering the Market course. So if you would like to learn more, please visit IamJustSing.com and check out the Mastering the Market course today. Although it is directed and specialized for Forex, all of the skills, I crafted them to be transferable to any market that you're looking at. So again, visit IamJustSing.com and check out the Mastering the Market course today if you are truly looking to master the market. Oh yeah, and don't forget, while I still got you, you can use promo code QUARANTINE to save over 90% off of the enrollment of the full price of the course. That is QUARANTINE, QUARANTEEN. you know. So that's one of the that's the, in a sense, I ain't gonna say the icing on the cake, but that's the major point and the main biggest point of what knowledge of self really is. You attain the knowledge, then you start to apply it. But you have to apply it in the scope and in the realm and in the perspective that, you know, you have to know what was, what is, and what will be. You know, you cannot stay stuck in the same loop of the past and a little bit of the present. You know, you have to be forward thinking. You have to be, you know, you have to be, you know, producing as well. You have to be producing as well. So it's like, from that perspective, you can't, it's pointless to say I came from a king or queen and you're not striving to make a dynasty. You're not striving to create your own kingdom, you know. But then it starts in the internal aspect with self, you know, knowing your quirks, knowing what works for you, knowing how you're supposed to move in life. Like, when you know your gifts, like, no, you should know your gifts, and people should be able to experience them the right way, you know. But when people tell you what you're good at, sometimes we internalize that as gifts. I talked about that in the recent podcast. I want to say it was probably Intentions and Goals, where I talk about talent, skills, and gifts, and how to tap back into the essence of knowing that. But that comes into with the knowledge of self, the things that you're good at. Figure out the principle behind why you're good at, why it's a skill, and that will tell you what the talent is. And then when you figure out the principle behind what the talent is, you'll figure out what your gift is, you know. And then from your gift, now you learn how to maneuver into the world according to how you're put here to maneuver. Everybody has a mission. Everybody has something that they're supposed to be doing. They have not one, I'm not going to say one gift or anything like that, but we have at least one. We have at least one gift that we're supposed to use to give back to the world, to move the world forward, to push society forward. But, you know, it comes with knowledge of self, you know, and that knowledge, with knowledge of self, the power comes from the application of self, because that leads to the wisdom. Wisdom leads to understanding. The moment you understand yourself, it's one thing to know yourself. Know yourself gives you a certain level of power, but it's one thing to understand yourself, because once you understand yourself, now you can step into the realm definitively. You can step into the realm of alchemy and creation, you know. And a lot of times, you know, when we look at alchemy, right? When we look at alchemy and creation, we think as a creator, you know, with practicing alchemy, I'm turning silver into gold all the time. In metaphorically and in essence, that is the reality. You know, you're turning a simple thing into something complex, or you're turning something that, you know, may have no value into something that is valuable, and vice versa. Because you can have a negative form of alchemy in which you destroy everything you touch. You feel what I'm saying? And you can have that blurred line where, you know, the too much of a good thing cliche comes in, and you can have something that can produce something great, but it consumes you, and now you're destroying it. Perfect example is the Midas touch. You feel me? But when it comes to alchemy, alchemy is creation. Alchemy is the fuel that makes creation happen. Alchemy is, you know, the ability to manipulate circumstance, the ability to manipulate physical pieces of the world to give you something of creation, to give you something tangible, to give you something fruitful within the world, you know. So to become, so there's a common thing that people say, you know, everybody can produce, everybody has the power to have alchemical moments, but everybody isn't an alchemist. If you basically just study words and study, you know, suffixes and stuff, the suffix ist and ist is somebody who has perfected the art or perfected the craft of the root word that precedes it. You feel what I mean? So, for example, a pianist, they have perfected the art of the piano. Violinist has perfected the art of the violin and using it. You feel me? They have reached that level of perfection. A racist has done what? But nah, that's a little, you know, little jokey joke. But nah, that's the point I'm saying. So an alchemist is one who has perfected the conceptualization and the practice of alchemy. You feel me? And a lot of times, that comes with, of course, the knowledge of self. But when it gets to the level of alchemist, you have to understand yourself to become an alchemist, because having an alchemical moment doesn't necessarily qualify you as an alchemist, because can you reproduce that several times over? Can you have those moments multiple times? And not only that, as an alchemist, can your alchemy cause other people to have alchemical moments, or other things to have alchemical moments? You dig what I'm saying? Perfect examples, if you look at basketball. Periodically, you'll see some random shit. A random motherfucker make a three-pointer. You feel me? Perfect example. When Dwight Howard played for the Lakers the first time, he made a three-pointer. Dwight Howard's not a three-point shooter, but he made a three-pointer. So that would be the equivalent of having an alchemical moment, but that doesn't make him an alchemist, because he cannot reproduce that several times over. Steph Curry is a three-point shooter. Not only does he have the alchemical moments of the three-point shot, he can produce that several times over. You feel me? That's where the alchemist piece comes in. So when you look at yourself, you go through your levels of knowledge of self. You know who you are, and you have applied who you are several times over. Now you have the wisdom of self. You feel me? That comes from experience. That comes from living life. You're gonna have to bump your head a few times. You feel me? You're gonna have to bump your head a few times, but then that gets you to the level of understanding. And that's when you can get into your level of alchemy. That's when you can have your alchemical moments. First, you have your alchemical moments, and then when you can reproduce an alchemical moment, that's when you can become an alchemist in regards to that particular thing. You feel what I'm saying? Is that making sense? Like, that takes the time, that takes the patience, that takes the dedication and the discipline to get there. Alchemy is not magic. Like, in the cliche senses, if you gotta, snap your fingers and this shit happens. You utter the Hebrew word abracadabra. What I speak, I create. You know what I'm saying? It's deeper than that. The reason why what you speak, you create, is because the moment you utter it, you have now put that thing in motion. Speech is the first form of overcoming the inertia into creation. You speak it. There's, just as in religious texts, it says, let there be light. The words had to be spoken, then light happened. You feel what I'm saying? And in Kemet, they have a three deity expression called Sia, Hu, and Heka, which is one of my favorites. It's I think divine, I speak divine, I do divine. So you have the thought first, which is when it conceptualizes in the mind. Then you have the speech, and then you have the action. You feel what I'm saying? You have to do something. It's not a matter of just saying let there be light, or saying these things. There has to be an action that precedes it. You have to create the very thing. I mean, there has to be an action that follows it, because those are the levels of it. So when it comes to having your alchemical moments, once you think, and you can say, if you can think it in your head, literally it can happen in real time. When you think realistically, let me say that shit, because I don't want to be on no fanatical shit like, I can make $1 million tomorrow, and then now you mad at me because you didn't generate $1 million the next day in 24 hours just because you thought about the shit, and just because you spoke it, because there's now that intermediary step between the speech and the action that is what's going to make that happen. You feel me? And another thing that you have to take into consideration with that is time. It can still happen within the time, but it's like, if you give up before it manifested itself, because there's a long process that has to continually happen before the alchemical thing is complete, between the time frame of speech and action. You feel what I'm saying? Between that aspect of speech and action. But in between time, that's when the experience is coming in. That's when the understanding is coming in. That's when the knowledge of self is 100% being applied. You dig what I'm saying? So when it comes to our internal aspects, when it comes to who we are, who we truly are, when we're trying to define ourselves, when we're wanting to be knowledgeable about ourselves, of course, you have to go back to your history, and you have to, like I said, the bow and arrow metaphor, but then you have to stay in the present. What currently is going on? Like, what do I think like? What do I feel like? You feel me? How do I myself like to understand? Like, knowledge, to the obtaining of knowledge means that you have to go through the 5 senses to determine something. You feel what I'm saying? So when you have to internalize those 5 senses within the self, now you have to go into certain aspects of who you really are, not just from the spiritual aspect, not just from the mental aspect, but from the physical aspect as well. You feel me? When you start to learn that things that you eat, I'm going to say consume because it doesn't necessarily have to be physical food. The things that you consume alter your reality, whether that be physical food, whether that be mental food, or whether that be spiritual food. What you eat is what nourishes you. What you consume is what nourishes you. So you have to ask yourself, how are you being nourished? Are you being nourished by what you chose to nourish yourself with and what you knew was right for you as yourself? Or is it a part of the conditioning? Because as I said, it goes back to the history. You can't just, and then a part of knowledge of self too. And this is a part that I think a lot of people hate because you have to embrace the negative too. Two components that people shy away from and people seem to despise is the ego and negativity. I see so many people on some positive vibes only. You will never truly know yourself if you only see the positive of yourself. Conversely, you will never truly know yourself if you only see the negative of who you are. And if you it's going to seem crazy to say this like this, but you can't see negativity negatively. You feel what I'm saying? You have to see it as a simple pole of existence. There's a polarity, and the balance comes in between the negative and the positive. You dig what I'm saying? So you can't necessarily see, because you can have a negative trait that can produce positive results for you, just as well as you can have a positive trait that can produce negative results for you. You feel what I'm saying? But you have to know these two. You have to know these two polarities about yourself. Not just, I'm only going to focus on the good. Because in order to appreciate the good, you have to understand the bad. You feel what I'm saying? In order to appreciate the bad, you have to understand the good. So these things have to merge. So like I was saying, with negativity and the ego, people shy away from them. But those two components are pretty much the other half of yourself. How can you know your full self? How can you be complete? How can you truly know everything about you and know who you are if you're scared to embrace the negative side, scared to embrace the darkness? This is no way, shape, or form, as I always say, I got to keep reiterating this because people, they look at me a certain way and then they say a certain thing. This is no way, shape, or form a means to discredit or to bash any religious or spiritual beliefs. But if your spiritual beliefs only teaches you to see the light and not how to maneuver through the darkness, it's limiting you. It's going to limit you. And your knowledge of self, you're only going to be, you can only be half complete at most if you're only focused on the light. The light is easy to maneuver in. The light is easy to maneuver in. And the reason why the light is easy to maneuver in because it's external. You know what I'm saying? It's externally outside of you. But to maneuver in the darkness, you need to rely on your internal light. You feel what I'm saying? You need to rely on your internal light. So let's say, okay, I'll use this example as use this like metaphor. So if we're needing to use our internal light to maneuver through the darkness so we can see in the darkness, we also in a sense have to use our internal light, our internal darkness to maneuver through the light. Because if there is no darkness, the light can be too bright. You feel what I'm saying? The two have to balance out. In order to keep things from being too bright, there needs to be a form of darkness in it to dim it down. You feel what I'm saying? In order to keep things from being too dark, there needs to be a point of light in it to brighten it up. You feel what I'm saying? It's a balance. It's a duality. So when it comes to knowledge itself, you have to embrace that side. You can't shun away from it. You can't shy away from it, and you can't be against that, because now you have to apply both aspects, and now you have to start merging the two. The best example that I've ever seen in regards to a balance between, the self, in which you're taking your dark side and your light side together and merging them, is the story of Heru. Heru, Set, Asar, and Offset, right? Set represents the ego or whatnot. But one of the most important pieces to that, when I understood the story, was that like Heru never killed Set. That is one of the most important pieces to that, because Heru, at the end of it, when it was all said and done, he worked with Set. You feel me? Which means he mastered his ego. You know what I mean? And there's iconography of the two, working together. You feel what I'm saying? So it's like, you can't kill your ego. You have to use it. You have to master it. You have to understand it. And that comes with, in your ego, in many regards, your ego is who the hell you really are. You know what I mean? Your ego, in a lot of times, is who you are. But if you don't know yourself, and if you are predicating yourself off of what somebody else is telling you you are, then you're going to see your ego as a negative thing. And in a world where everybody wants to be positive, everybody wants to be love and light, everybody wants to be on the bright side of things, and nobody wants to embrace that darkness, nobody wants to be able to maneuver through the darkness and master that shit too, you're going to limit yourself. And then when it comes to that shit surfacing, it controls you. And you're not able to control it. The ego is always going to come up in our darkest moments. Not in our darkest moments. It's going to come up in our brightest moments. I said that wrong. Our ego is going to come up in our brightest moments, and it'll fuck up whatever it is we have going for us if we have not understood it, if we have not mastered it, if we just try to suppress it, you know. But until you merge the two, until you embrace these two aspects, you can't truly know yourself. Therefore, as I said, the power is in the application. If you're only applying half of yourself, you feel me? How much wisdom can you obtain? You feel me? And then if you're only able to, like, it's literally breaking down by fourths, by halves in a sense. So if you're taking half of yourself to apply wisdom, only a fourth of yourself will show from the wise perspective of yourself, which can potentially lead to, 75% of yourself being folly, being foolishness. And then half of that is wisdom, because you're only using the light side. Half of that is going to be wisdom. You dig what I'm saying? I mean, it's going to be understanding. So the complete being has to be able to master and apply both aspects. So the knowledge of self has to come in from everything about you. So like, the reason why I was saying that is because when we study history, we can't just study the good. We can't just study the good. We got to study the bad too. When we're studying ourselves, we're understanding our emotions and the things like that. We can't just focus on the things that make us happy. We got to focus on the things that make us sad. And vice versa. We can't just focus on the things that make us sad. We have to also focus on the things that can make us happy. Because now that's where, when you know these things, now you know how to turn them on and off. Because everything is about duality. Everything is about a balance. You feel me? If this trigger makes me mad, there's also a trigger that makes me happy. You feel me? We talk about triggers all the time. I'm triggered by this, but every trigger that we have seems to be negative. You feel me? Why don't we know our positive emotional triggers? Because they're so easy to deal with. The positive emotional triggers, we don't really focus on. Ask a person right now what triggers them positively about some shit. Like, what is something that people are still searching for happiness right now, not realizing that it's a trigger that needs to be set off. The pursuit of happiness. Like, you shouldn't have to chase it, because you damn sure don't have to chase darkness. You feel me? All you got to do is get with a motherfucker that's going to trigger you. You have to get with somebody or be in a situation where somebody could do something that triggers you, that sends you to a negative place. Right? But we don't identify our positive triggers, because that comes from not really knowing ourselves. Because the very things that when we truly know these essences of ourselves, when we truly know these things, it's like, what can we really do? What can we really do with this power? You feel me? Imagine, and that comes with, I'd probably do a podcast on this, on the chakras and the emotions and things like that. But how much more could we do if we knew how to master our emotions? But how do you master your emotions if you don't know what your triggers are? But you need to know both sides, because like I said, if I only know the triggers that make me sad, that anger me, that are bad for me, if I only know those triggers, I'm going to walk on eggshells through life. I'm going to stay away from this person because, oh, you're toxic. I ain't going to fuck with you because I know you're going to trigger this out of me. Right? So that's giving them that power. So, you feel me? Well, within the knowledge of self that you have, okay, you trigger me with this. You feel what I'm saying? Now, run that back. I'm not saying fuck with toxic people. Hell no. Don't do that. You feel what I'm saying? But when you understand what a toxic person can trigger, you feel me? And you say, I'm going to stay away from them. Right? But you shouldn't stay away from them. You need to understand what that trigger is. Because it doesn't matter if it's that person or not. Because you can get with a healthy person that can still trigger the same shit because it's you. It's not them. It's you. your trigger will still go off. You feel what I'm saying? And in that same aspect, this is why a lot of toxic relationships continue, because that toxic person can still trigger positive shit in you. But we don't identify our positive triggers because that's the one we're supposed to have. We feel like that's what we're supposed to embody. That's what we're supposed to continually deal with on a regular basis. The positive side, the positive triggers. So we don't even know what's triggering us to make us feel good. You feel what I'm saying? This is how we can then get into relationships that in the beginning, oh, it seems so good. It's all right. It's in love. It's light. It's all of this shit. And then suddenly the bad part comes in. We start to see a little bit of the darkness. And, excuse me, we start to see a little bit of the darkness. And now all of a sudden we're afraid of it. Now all of a sudden it's, nah, I can't rock with you because you're supposed to be love and light. We're supposed to be positive all the time. A trigger is a trigger. You feel what I mean? And your triggers can be affected by people that are good to you, and they can be affected by people that are bad to you. You feel me? And they can cross lines. You feel me? But you won't know that until you truly know who you are. Until you truly know yourself and you spend time with you. You feel what I'm saying? And you can't only focus on one polarity of yourself. Because the way, I don't know, it's just how it has to happen, yo. But the way the universe works is through balance. Simple balance. So if all you want to be in life is positive, guess what's going to happen? Darkness has to come to balance you out. If all you want to be in life is and that's why people be like, yo, how do bad people get good shit? Sometimes shit just has to balance. Like, you ever notice how motherfuckers can have case in point. I might spoil it if you ain't seen Power yet or whatnot, whatever. But anyway, for 6 seasons straight, you feel me? Ghost has done fucked up shit to everybody. It's just like he just done fucked up shit. He was just in a negative light, and he was just embodying that. But it was like, yo, good shit just kept happening to him more or less. Now he had his bad hiccups and shit, but when he finally decided, I'm done with all of this shit for real. Like, I'm done. I'm not even gonna play this game. I'm not getting in this. I'm out. I'm 100% out. You feel me? That's when suddenly all of the dark shit finally caught up with him. You feel what I'm saying? There was not balance had to be made. Balance had to be made. But you feel me? That was just an example. But it's an example of when you start to know yourself and when you start to operate from this balance and you start to apply it. First thing is, like, start to learn your triggers, yo. Know your triggers and know what is causing that. Like, it's deeper than just, studying history when you got to know yourself. Because that shit is mundane at the end of the day, because history changes. It's basically stories that motherfuckers want you to tell. I always say, bad guys are good and the good guys are villains. The monster is the one who's described by the children of the storyteller. You feel what I'm saying? Whoever wants the story to be told a certain way is going to tell it how they want it to be told. You feel what I'm saying? So take history for what it is and use that to fuel you for knowledge self, but more so go in internally and start to figure out who the fuck you are as like on your thought process, on your feels, on everything that governs you, and learn to start walking the balance between the two and understanding what things are affecting you that don't affect you and what power they have within you. You feel what I'm saying? And when you start to do that, when you start to see that in real time, when you start to maneuver according to that, that's when you can apply yourself and develop the level of wisdom. You feel what I'm saying? Once you develop the level of wisdom and you start to apply your experiences, then that's when you can come to understanding and you truly understand yourself. So when you are in these situations where you could potentially be triggered by something, you're not. You feel me? And you're not easily manipulated either. I feel like manipulation is when manipulation, in my opinion, is when somebody can tap into your happiness or your positive emotions and trigger them without you knowing, because you don't know what your triggers are. You feel me? Like, it becomes easy to be manipulated when you don't know what your positive triggers are, because now I exploit those. I exploit those. When I was young and I was, in my whole phase back in the day, you feel me? One of the ploys that I guess I would use to get women, call them beautiful. We still, and now it's transitioned to goddess, peace queen and peace goddess and shit like that. if you're not in tune with yourself, that's a positive trigger for you. You feel me? Especially in our community. If women have gone from being called bitches, hoes, sluts, tricks, all of that shit for so long, and then all of a sudden she's called a goddess. All of a sudden you're telling that the black woman is God and all of this, and you're giving her all of this positive aspect, but she doesn't know that this is a trigger right now, and it's triggering her because it's triggering the self-esteem, it's triggering these aspects. Same with us too. You know, being called king, being called handsome, and all of this stuff, like flirting, those are triggering happy emotions. And if you don't know how to trigger your own happy emotions, you don't know what's triggering your own shit, you can easily be manipulated. It's the same thing. If you never learn how to trigger your bad emotions, your whole self-image can be depleted and destroyed because somebody else has that power, because they could turn your triggers on and off. And don't forget to take a moment to go get your exclusive merchandise from Just Scenes merch. At Just Scenes, each piece is specifically crafted with positive imagery and symbolism. From the titles and designs to the descriptions, each style gives you something to feel great about. With everything from hoodies and tees to coffee mugs and tote bags, we have something for the entire family. So be sure to get yours today. Find us on Instagram at Just Scenes merch and get your merchandise right now. Yeah, so with that, it's kind of I kind of just wanted to touch up on that a little bit, and just give a different, I ain't gonna say a different perspective, but just give some insight behind the knowledge itself. Seemed a little bit random, but at the same time, it was more so to cover what we deem about ourselves and how to actually tap into who we are. You feel what I'm saying? It's a lot. All of this shit is internal. All of this shit is internal, and it's what you're supposed to truly embody for self. You dig what I'm saying? It's what you're supposed to truly embody for yourself. And it's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to be right. But at the same time, it shouldn't always be. It's a duality in life, and knowing yourself is no different. And if knowledge is power, in order for you to be powerful, you have to apply the knowledge you have of yourself. Therefore, you have to apply yourself. Turn your power into strength by applying it continually. You feel me? Then turn your strength into invincibility by applying your wisdom, through which the knowledge has now manifested itself. You feel what I'm saying? And once you do that, you step into the world. You're able to better create the world that you want for yourself, the world that you want to see, and the world that you want to thrive. In the future for you and yours, for you and your offspring and shit like that. But it has to start within. Nobody outside you can dictate anything for you, and they shouldn't, because when they do, that means they control your soul, they control your will. Now this is not towards anybody or any entity, saying that it shouldn't. That's what's bagging your groceries. So by all means, paper or plastic. But at the same time, before you can start relinquishing your will to something, you got to know yourself and know what you're supposed to relinquish your will up to. Not just because somebody told you, not because somebody, because when that foundation crumbles, that's when you start to lose your mind. Because when you start to find bits of information that may prove this to be a fallacy, or when you start to find certain things that make this, you start to internalize that something's not right with you. But it's not the case. It's just whatever it was that has indoctrinated you, whatever it was that has conditioned you, who you truly were, it finally emerged. And you happen to go through your spiritual awakening. You feel me? And this can all be avoided. Well, it can't be avoided. Let me say that shit right now. The spiritual awakening can be avoided. Everybody's going to go through a spiritual awakening in their own time, however the case may be. It's, do you truly know when you truly know yourself, when you start to learn yourself more in the process, your spiritual awakening becomes easier. If you're better armed prior to that happening, by knowing who you are, knowing your darkness and knowing your light, and being able to allow the two to work together, when your spiritual awakening happens, you're going to be able to maneuver accordingly. You dig what I'm saying? You'll be able to move as you should. Until you do that, what I mean, it's gonna be very difficult. It's gonna be very difficult and very challenging going forward, because it's like, what more do I have to do? What more will I have to do? And the first thing and always the most important thing is to know yourself. Know yourself, then apply yourself. And that's when knowledge is powered. Knowledge becomes power. The application of knowledge becomes powered. And then you become powerful. Feel me? So with that being said, I'm going to end that right there. I really feel like that one was all over the place. I really do. But forgive me if it is all over the place to you and it doesn't have any flow and everything like that. But, kudos if it does and everything still flows. But as always, be sure to follow me on, all of my social media platforms. Be sure to get my books, So Frail, A Reality to Black Male Masculinity, So Frail 2, Toxic Femininity, and Hitting It Raw, Living the Raw Plant-Based Lifestyle for Life. All of the links to everything is in the description of your podcast. And if you would like to, you can support the podcast channel by clicking the support link that is also in the description of your bio. I also take tips and donations if you're feeling in the mood. 'Tis the season anyway. It's what? October, November, something. It's November. My bad. I'm off. We skip Thanksgiving, go straight to Christmas anyway. But yeah. Know yourself, apply yourself, and become powerful. Tap into you to become the alchemist that you were created to be and produce for the world and give to the world what you're supposed to give it. You feel what I'm saying? And don't hold back. Don't apologize for who you're supposed to be and complete your mission. With that being said, peace, love, knowledge, and freedom. And I will see you all on the next podcast episode.